So I want to design a dirt bike rack with a canopy underneath, and it's going to look something like this when it's finished. In this video, we design and build the motorized slide mechanism to move the bike from the ground to this position on the back of the ute so I can confidently attack the canopy design. Before we get to this though, there is plenty of CAD, CNC cutting, TIG, MIG and fabrication along the way, on a journey that proved to be much more difficult than I first anticipated. You may be wondering how this idea came about. See, I'm a bike rider and I have been for years. My chosen method of loading bikes is onto the back of a likely jacked up ute. This is fraught with danger at the best of times, and you're only ever one mistake away from having a heavy bike land onto you in a heap, as you can see from these poor souls here. There are heaps of different loaders available on the market, however the bike generally sits flat and it's hard to get all your gear in there as well. What if you could maximise the real estate available on the tray and make loading a bike more convenient while you're at it? How good would it be if you could load your bike with the press of a button and have a dedicated setup for dirt bikes? One where you could just put your bikes on and take off for the weekend with things like camping gear, a fridge, a kitchen and every conceivable piece of dirt biking paraphernalia included as well. But I'll delve into that in a future episode. We need a slide mechanism to take the bike from the ground level to the travel position. There are heaps of different ways to do this, but everything off shelf is not budget friendly and not exactly what I'm after, so I'll have to design a heavy duty slider, which is something I haven't done before, but we're going to give it a red hot go. The length of the slider is also problematic. The length required is longer than the hypotenuse of the tray, meaning it would overhang from the tray and ruin my departure angle, and above all, look like crap, meaning we have to come up with some sort of slide extension as well. The other big one is tying the bike down. I'm shooting for the holy grail here, avoiding the use of tie-down straps because I don't like them and I think I could come up with something better. Given these problems, I whipped up my first design in CAD. I opted for Unistrut for the heavy-duty slider, which would be powered by an ATV winch. The extension would be simple and use an electric actuator and a pivot, and the bike was going to be held upright by an off-shelf wheel holder with tie-down straps. I wanted a test jig for my heavy-duty slide, so I designed this in CAD, which would save me from putting it on and off the back of the car until I was happy with the final design. I cut it out on the plasma table, then I was able to weld it together with the new MIG Unimig sent me for this project. I got some other goodies as well, like a spool gun, and I'll put them to the test when we stick the canopy together. After the welding was complete, I busted out the sockets to assemble the jig. I then bolted down the Unistrut carriage rollers to the jig, which is what my heavy duty slide would rest on. Now it was time to weld on the winch mount and pulley system. Then it was time to mount the winch. This is a 12 volt ATV winch rated to 1200 kilos, which should be more than enough capacity to deal with a dirt bike that's around the 100 kilo mark. Now that the jig is complete, I can move on to the heavy duty slide. And I'm starting by cutting the galvanized Unistrut as I couldn't get the right stuff delivered in time. I'm also putting holes in the end of the Unistrut for travel stops for my carriage. And I'm removing the nasty stuff from the areas which I want to weld. Checking square before we weld both sides together. Once it was all welded up, it was time to assemble the front wheel carriage before we could test it out. I welded a bolt into those holes I previously drilled to stop the carriage. This would allow the sled to be pulled up by the winch as well, and you'll see what I mean in a second. Yeah, like so. Oh, that's a pretty nice hoodie you're wearing there, mate. Where'd you get that from?
Oh, it's just from your website, Design and Built, isn't it? designandbuilt.com.au, is that right? It?
Time to wire up the winch and test this thing out. First test, bit nervous. Not really sure how it's going to go.
How do you think it's going to go? The electrician's drinking a beer and the plumber's doing the wiring, mate.
Yep. Sick. Out.
Okay. You trust your welds?
Yeah, go. Yeah, stop there, stop. Dude, not bad.
That's good.
At the moment, there's an extra degree of freedom in this. There's a bit of play that way. So we're going to add some roller bearings right here, which should fix it all up for us. Here, I'm adding a manual sled stop as well as the roller bearing. This is absolutely an afterthought, and there is room for improvement in the final design, but this will stop the sled from sliding too far back for now. Time to press on with making the extension. And I'm following the same process as before, except this time much faster for YouTube. Now that the extension's complete, it's time to weld it onto the main sled with some subpar hinges from my local hardware store. And there we have it, a hinged extension. Let's mount and wire the actuator to raise and retract it. Looks like the extension works in principle. I'm now adding some crude tread plates so the back wheel has somewhere to rest before we can put it all together on a test rig. I need to use my ute quite regularly, so I've come up with a creative solution for the test rig, which consists of 2 Kincrome toolboxes. Shout out to the legends down at Kincrome for backing this channel from the start. I was still working on my tie-down free front wheel holder, so temporarily to test the slides we're using a ratchet strap around the front wheel. First test. Oh, hang on.
I reckon we keep going.
Keep going. In my mind at this point, I was high-fiving myself as well. I thought the job was done on the slide mechanism, however, this turned out not to be the case. Onwards and upwards for now though, let's move on to the strap-free front wheel holder. The plan was to take the existing front wheel holder and add a pivot and a handle with a slot that tightens as you push down to clamp the wheel in, all without the use of a strap. I would have to add some sort of locking device at a later stage, but I just wanted to see if this would work first. Time to weld the handle onto the front wheel holder, and straight away I could see it needed some ramps before the slot so it would load automatically. You'll see what I mean in a second. And there we go, we've added some ramps. First test with the over center lever, let's see how it goes. Turns out it wasn't quite as steady as I hoped. Back to the drawing board. But before we could get back to the drawing board, there were a few other problems to overcome. Unsurprisingly, the lightweight hinges were damaged in the fall, so time to fix the jig and put some heavy duty ones on. Much better. We have a bit of a problem with this actuator. When it's depowered, it doesn't have enough force to take the weight of the bike, and as a result, the ramp kinks up. Have a look at this. So we're trying this one here. It's a worm drive actuator, and these are supposed to have a bit more static force. Out with the old bracketry. And in with the new. Well, it appears to be much slower, but does it stop the ramp from kinking? Seems like it. The new worm drive actuator worked like a charm, and it seemed like there was enough static hold force. However, once I put the dirt bike up all the way, I really didn't like how the extension protruded past the rear wheel. And it looks like we're going back to the drawing board on this one as well. Quick recap of the first prototype design. The slide was okay, but not perfect. The extension was a no-go because of the protrusion, and the front wheel holder without straps didn't really work. Let me have another crack at the front wheel holder. This is a similar design to the first one, however it has straight side plates and can be adjusted to slide in so it hugs the side of the tyre. Let's cut this thing out on the CNC plasma and stick it together. Front and side plates done, let's bust out the TIG for some delicate stud welding. And let's bolt everything together now. Yet again, it was time to put the theory to the test. These side bits are fully adjusted now, and as the bike moves side to side, they should catch the bike from falling. So I do have straps on there, but they're loose and they're just for backup. We've managed to get it working with no straps, but you can see the bike's on a little bit of an angle. It is possible, but is it worth it? I mean, do I keep going down this path of trying to develop something without straps? Or do I just make it easy for myself and, you know, go without? I guess it's a good question. My initial idea was to use some of these on the foot pegs as well as the no strap design. Push down to lock it in like that, which would hold the bike down. We'll give it a quick go. These foot peg holders work well, however, it was really hard to activate the opposite side one, which would be problematic on the Canopy. But I'm sure this could have probably been solved with yet another complicated mechanism. We're a couple of weeks into prototyping now, and I'm just not happy with this Unistrut. You can see there's a lot of compliance in it, and probably I should have picked up on that many weeks ago. The compliance would lead to the bike moving around quite a bit while it's on the back of the rack, which is not ideal at all, especially when you're going off-road and the terrain's quite rough. So the long and short of it is I'm not happy with this slide mechanism, and it's taken me a few weeks of just looking at it to figure out how to do a different one. What drew me to the Unistrut and rollers is it seemed like it was really easy. and it seemed like I'd just be able to put sort of the bearing carriers on the back of the canopy and that was job done. And it's taken me a few weeks to figure out that it's not for me, and that's why we build prototypes, to figure out this stuff. So it feels like I'm going 10 steps backwards, but actually I've done a lot of learning, and I'd rather make the mistake now while we're building prototypes rather than when I'm working on the back of the car. With all this learning in mind, I came up with a completely new slide design. I went back to the drawing board and redid every single thing from scratch. The sled would now be constructed from RHS and SHS, which would be much more sturdy. I ditched the actuators and the extension was now completely removable and operated manually. I succumbed to defeat and the front wheel holder was now going to use straps after all. And the bearing carriers were now a completely different design, using some laser cut bits of steel and some HDPE coated bearings. Every dirt biker knows the wider the straps, the more stable the bike. The same sort of principle goes for the slide mechanism, but I have ambition to package a spare wheel in the middle of it all, so I've started off with the narrowest it could possibly go, and then we'll make it wider if need be. I've also opted to put the bearing carriers on the inside, which is counterintuitive from a compliance perspective, and will likely rock around a little more, but my god does it look good. Nice and sleek, which is exactly what I'm after. After a couple of days on the computer, it was time to stick it all together. I sent off my files to be laser cut instead of plasma cut, as the hole tolerances for the bearings were crucial to the slide operation. For those of you who are new to this, it's worth noting lasers offer much better accuracy at the pointy end of things. I got my steel cut at the supplier, and then it was finally time to stick it all together. I clamped everything down using a 20mm piece of SHS as a packer. I opted for the TIG since the weld bead is much smaller and I didn't want a dirty big MIG bead encroaching on my bearing surface. I'm pre-drilling some holes now while everything is apart to spot weld the extension latches you'll see later. Once again, I'm checking square and then using a combination of MIG and TIG to stick it all together. That's the sled and the extension all welded up now. Let's confirm the design by assembling the carriage. As with a lot of my computer designs, I've used keyways on this so it slots together like a jigsaw. These are my HDPE coated bearings I got from a local supplier. I'm using some M6 spacers behind them so I don't need a million washers. Smooth. Time to tap some holes into the extension hinges. I always undersize and then drill out to the correct tap size regardless of whether the part is coming off a plasma or a laser. All tacked up, and now it's time to plug weld the holes we drilled before. I'm just using M12s as the pivots for a proof of concept, but we might have to come back and machine some lugs later. Here's the female piece, and this is how it actuates. Let's weld it onto the extension now. Looks like the newly designed extension works now. How bloody good. Time to add a pulley to the sled for the winch rope. I'd thought of a different method for stopping the sled from sliding too far back, which involved weld nuts and bolts, which is what I'm doing now. Here I'm adding the newly designed carriage stops. Previously, I'd used a bolt in the Unistrut, but I wanted to maximise the amount of travel for the carriage, so I've gone with this design instead. Here, you can see the carriage now runs right to the end of the sled. Let's weld on some tie-down points before moving on to the runners. We could finally assemble the custom runners. First, I had to piece together and weld the bits for the lateral support bearings. Okay, so you'll notice that I bolted these rails down, and that's because I wanted some adjustment in them, just in case they're out of whack. I didn't exactly know what spacings to use on the bearings, so I left plenty of extra holes that I'm not using, just in case I needed to add more bearings. I completely guessed the spacings this time, and this set of runners has just over 50 bearings to distribute the load. The weld nut and bolt is now being put into action as a removable sled stop to prevent everything from overextending. Excellent. My garage is way too small for this project. I wish I had a bigger shed, but I don't. So we're doing the best with what we have. Time to give this thing a test. So let's do it. The cameras are rolling. Oops, looks like I forgot to put the tread plates in, preventing the bike from rolling up any further than this. There was also another problem. The pulley system wasn't quite working as intended. So back to CAD and the plasma table to fix it all up. I busted out the angle grinder for a quick rework on the pulleys. And then tacked up the newly designed rear wheel tread plates. Then it was time for final assembly round 2. Take number 2 of the second version of the slide. Let's do this. Very exciting. Put the bike on the jig for the first time, and overall pretty successful. There are a few tolerances we could tighten up. You can see the carriage is moving quite a lot, so we can get these bearings in a little bit further. And then the latch system isn't quite perfect. I think because I'm pivoting on bolts, the tolerances aren't quite good enough, so we'll have to get some lugs machined up, which is okay. Another problem is we can't get this sled all the way to the end of the rails, and it's due to the pulley system. Check out what I mean here. And I've had a bit of an idea. I've been sketching on paper for a while, so we'll pull this thing apart, cut it all up, and try the new pulley layout. I came up with a new design in CAD, and predictably, we went straight to the plasma table. I wanted to get the pulley system right before I trialled the jig on the car, so out comes the grinder again, followed by a symphony of MIG welding. There we go, pulley system version 3 now complete. Let's assemble it all again before another test. You can actually see that I've managed to overextend. So before I was finishing about 50mm that way, and now I can finish 50mm that way. You can see the pulleys are doing their job, and it's absolutely marvellous. Many hours of prototyping later, I was happy enough with the newly designed slide mechanism to test it out on the car. My tray is due for a repaint, so I'm going with the safest option, which is welding the test jig to the tray just to be sure that it's not going to go anywhere. And yep, in case you're wondering, I'm adding this crude safety lock to make sure the sled and carriage can't slide backwards in case the winch rope fails. Time for the first test. Obviously my garage isn't high enough, so we're off to the great outdoors. You might notice that I've parked up on a curb at the front and I've got a block there just to put the car on a bit of an angle because I've got slightly bigger tyres on it now. Without the canopy, the car is pitching forward a little bit. So when I do my final design, I've just got to lengthen that extension a little bit more. Dirt bike loader test number 1 on the car. Let's see how it goes. Got the car idling, give it a bit more juice. All right, so it is a little bit slow, but the extension seems to be working, which is really cool. Not intentional, but that just locked itself, which is really good. There we go, dirt bike loader test 1. Time to take this thing for a road test, and from the footage you can see the bike is a little more unstable than I would like. For the final design, I'll have to make everything wider and tighten up the tolerances. I also need to come up with a rear wheel tie down solution, and maybe the foot peg holders might get another run as well. It was pretty cool to see it driving around though. So after months of prototyping, I had finally come up with a concept I was happy with. It wasn't perfect by any means. There was so much I wanted to change between now and the final design, and you can be sure I'll keep persisting until everything is right. Join me next time as I continue to refine the slide mechanism and crack on with the canopy design. And if you like this sort of content, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and leave me a comment below.